I thought I know about your podcast, and I
Mm-hmm.
was really thinking about what I can contribute, and it's really quite numerous. And so, as I said, very little is hereditary, and so
Mm-hmm.
most of it is environmental. Is that
Mm-hmm.
we have family history and it not
Mm-hmm.
hereditary because we
Mm-hmm.
also share environment, share homes, maybe sometimes workplaces. So, um, so it's not always that there's a gene.
Hello, this is Izumi Tanaka with Home Green Homes podcast. In the last month or so, I have had episodes to discuss what makes a home healthy in comparison to home being green. I would say most of us who are interested in green homes would probably want our home to be healthy too. So I wanted to talk to a medical professional who can give a perspective from the medical standpoint of prevention. What is it that we should be all aware of so that we know our homes are a place of nourishment and healing? Today I have a guest named Melanie Palomares, who is an MD and MS. She is affectionately known as Dr. Mel, as a preventive oncologist and a founder of Cancer Prevention Movement. Let's hear from her. So thank you so much, Melanie, for being here with me today.
Thank you.
So I would like for you to tell me who you are and what you do. It's actually quite fascinating.
Sure thing. Gosh, that's kind of a complex question, though. So who am I? I'm a woman who was born in South Carolina and made myself around different places and landed in Los Angeles where I met you. Um, I say it that way because what I do is not necessarily who I am, and I think that's an important
Mhm.
reminder for all of us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But even though your question was who I am, I will also say, what do I do?
Yeah.
As you said very nicely, I'm a preventive oncologist. So your listeners might be saying, what is a preventive oncologist? Well, it's
Mhm.
a term that I made up because there are people out there that call themselves preventive cardiologists.
Mhm.
So at some point in the past, people used to, I'll say it just really not in a nice way, but in the vein of trying to be funny, but they used to just fall over and it turned out that they had a heart attack or a stroke and nobody really knew what those were. And then they finally
Right.
named, and then it was like, but we don't know what causes them. So then they just sort of treated people as they had heart attacks and strokes.
Right.
But then there were studies in the 1970s that showed that people that have diabetes or
Mm.
had high cholesterol or high blood pressure or high stress or family history or they smoked, that all of these
Mm.
were risk factors for heart disease and stroke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now those have become diseases themselves, and we don't wait till somebody has a heart attack or a stroke. We treat the high blood pressure or the
Mm.
high blood sugar, right?
Mhm. Right.
So I've been doing what I've been doing for about 25 years. And so it's a little early, I think, for my time, but I could
Mhm.
see this vision that cancer, which is only second to heart disease as a
Mhm.
disease related, so heart disease is the number one disease related killer in the US,
Mhm.
and cancer is number two, but in
Mhm.
California, cancer is number one under the
Oh,
age
wow.
of 55. Yeah, so heart disease has been coming down, whereas
Mm.
cancer has either stayed the same or gotten higher depending on the type of cancer. So
Mhm.
I could see that we were beginning to understand what precancers were,
Mm.
intervening at the time of precancer. We also, at that time, when I first started my career, had just started hereditary cancer genetic testing.
Mm.
And so we could identify who had an increased risk without having anything, not even a precancer, and
Right.
intervene early in those
Mm.
individuals. Since
Mhm.
then, we went from knowing about 2 genes to knowing about 500 genes
Mm.
associated with cancer. And so, whereas I started out in, as you mentioned, I'm trained in oncology, but also epidemiology and genetics.
Mm.
So initially we knew about genes, but your topic that you wanted me to talk about is environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to point out that okay, so genes are involved in every cancer. What happens is that there's a mutation that somehow our body doesn't either correct or inhibit or get rid of. And so then
Right.
the cell divides and it keeps dividing and that grows into a tumor. And I'm simplifying it. It's a little bit more complex than that. And usually our bodies are so good at proofreading or sequestering or getting rid of that we could have the beginnings, the very beginnings of a cancer, a pre-cancer, like pre in our body and never know it. Most of us really do. There have been autopsy studies where they looked at women after they had passed away of something else and found that of us have pre-invasive breast cancer, and it never becomes a problem. So kind of like cancer's become such like an ugly word, and imagine it was like those decades ago how people about stroke and heart attack, like everyone disease, like people are right now people are afraid of cancer. But it's interesting, I don't think that, because really it comes from us, so it starts within us. So why would we be afraid of part of us? Like a wounded inner child in a way. It's in us. We need to befriend that, right? Or and learn how to deal with it. So all that, we did learn about genes first, and I did say that genes are involved in every cancer, but most of them are mutations that happen after we're born because of things that we expose ourselves in the environment.
Right.
Hereditary type of cancer, that's only 5 to 10% of cancers.
Wow.
So when you asked about environment, I'm telling you it's the majority.
Right. Wow. That's actually a stunning information. You know, because I come from a family of three of my grandparents died of cancer. My father died of cancer. My mom had breast cancer in her 60s. She lived to be 93, but I have a very prominent cancer gene in my I think in my blood. So that's actually really good
You
to
know.
know.
You do, or you wonder?
I wondered. Well,
We
I
can
mean,
look
I
for
haven't,
you.
I haven't tested, but I know that there's in the family history, there's a lot of cancer. So so I know that it's not, your work really spans way beyond just the environmental, carcinogens. But, like you said, I did want to talk to medical professional like yourself because I have this my podcast is called Home Green Homes, and I have been talking about how to make a home green, and in the last few episodes I have had, this whole idea of green home is becoming it's rumbling. It's not just the environmental issues, but it's human health issues. So I wanted to talk to somebody like yourself to really understand what in a home environment, and home environment, not just the interior of our homes, but including where the home is, how we are affected by what's out there in the environment. So what are in your profession, and how you have been dealing with probably patients and in preventive way. So what are we exposed to, Melanie, that might be causing these cancers?
Right. I thought I know about your podcast, and I was really thinking about what I can contribute, and it's really quite numerous. And so, as I said, very little is hereditary, and so most of it is environmental. So one thing I want to say, it's tangential to your question, but I don't want it to be lost, is that we have family history and it not hereditary, because we also share environments, share homes. We
Right.
maybe sometimes workplaces, and so so it's not always that there's a gene in your and lots of times end up reassuring people after doing genetic testing. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
something out there for you. But to
Yeah.
answer your question more directly, so environment, I think sometimes we think of it only as what's in the air or
Mm.
chemicals, and I think it goes beyond that. But I will say some things anyway. So one would be like, where do you live? You brought that up. So pollution and associated with lung disease, including lung cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be just pollution from outside. It
Right.
could be what we use as cleaning products. So there's
Right.
actually a study that showed that weekly use of cleaning products that included non-natural things like ammonias and things like that,
Right. Mm-hmm.
that it was associated with as much lung disease as
Right.
smoking a pack a day.
Right. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not necessarily cancer, but included cancer. The asthma
Mm-hmm.
could be other things. But when I saw that study, I took it to heart and I started replacing everything in my home,
Yeah.
to make sure that I was using
Mm-hmm.
cleaning products. It's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
To be clean
Mm-hmm. I know, right?
themselves can be an issue. So that's one. Another is, like a clean source of water and
Mm.
clean air. So,
Mm-hmm.
like HVAC systems, you can put in filters, and 11, well, it only goes up to 13. So 11 or 13 is what's recommended to keep
Mm-hmm.
out bacteria and viruses.
That's the MERV, MERV, MERV 11 to 13. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 13 is like hospital grade. That's
Mm.
more than you need in your home. At least 11. And
Mm-hmm.
I say that because there are some things, not necessarily airborne. Sometimes it's water, which is why we're.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some bacteria and viruses like hepatitis is associated,
Mm-hmm.
chronic hepatitis is associated with liver cancer or
Mm-hmm.
carcinoma, and Helicobacter pylori is associated with stomach ulcers, but also stomach cancer. And EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, is associated with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's something else called HPV that's associated with cervical cancer and some other,
Oh, wow.
but
Mm-hmm.
that one is usually transmitted with personal relations, like sexual,
Oh, right. I see. I
and not
see.
so much through
Mm-hmm.
these environmental things. But
Mm-hmm.
there are some infections associated. Let me see, what else can I think of? How about EMFs?
Mm-hmm.
Magnetic
Yes.
field. Yes. So, and we kind of do that to ourselves, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they say also just for good sleep to keep your
Right.
TV out of your bedroom,
Right.
not sleep with your phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those sort of things. So basically, a screen-free bedroom. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing is placement of plants.
Yeah.
Supposed to clean the air.
Right.
So certain plants would be good throughout the home. Another one, okay, so I want to make sure I talk about the Outsmart Cancer consultation at the end, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, gosh, we'd ask about a lot of things, but one of the things is about, it might be close to 20 to 30 different substances that we ask
Mm-hmm.
if anyone thinks they've been exposed.
Right.
It would include the home or workplace, but one of them is soot.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
Like from
So it
smog from the streets,
could be
like
from
when
your
you,
fireplace.
oh, from your
from,
fireplace.
from your
Wow.
chimney. Yeah,
Mm.
so they found it more with chimney sweeps in the
Mm.
olden days,
Yeah.
but I think it's a good thing that more homes have like these sort of gas fireplaces instead of something where you're burning.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that
Interesting.
interesting? Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned already radon. Did I say that already?
No, you haven't mentioned radon.
Okay. So radon is a chemical that can be in soil and out
Mm.
through the home. And
Mm-hmm.
so some places like in California, we are required to have a
Yes.
radon detector.
Right.
But not everyone knows that, and maybe there are non-Californians on your on your
Yeah.
test. So
Yeah.
I think awareness that having a radon detector, because it's you don't, it's colorless and without odor. So
Mm-hmm.
you need a detector in order to know that it's in your home.
Now, do you see any trend as our home environment, including, as you said, EMF? EMF comes with all the technologies. I have had recently had episodes that I interviewed a gentleman who had a high sensitivities with everything, including EMF, including natural products, including mold. Um, I mean, we have so many things that we are exposed to, and especially now that, in the last 10 years or so, when our life has become so dependent on this invisible signals around us, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and whatnot. So do you see any trend in cancer treatments or in the medical um, field? Do you see more people getting cancer or getting sick in the recent years, or am I just imagining?
Well, that's a really good question. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to say because trends to see
Sure.
when they look at so there's the American Cancer Society looks every January, they do a publication of current
Mm-hmm.
cancer statistics. And
Mm-hmm.
this year what they reported was actually a decrease in cervical cancer due to
Oh,
the
interesting.
vaccine, prostate cancer, but an increase, maybe it was an increase in, no, it was a decrease in cervical and lung and an increase in prostate cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So then
Interesting.
overall, if you look at cancers, it looks like it didn't change. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
There's movement within the disease,
Mm-hmm.
the same disease. There are
Mm-hmm.
others that decreased over time, like breast cancer increased over, like increased a little in the 80s and then started decreasing in the 2000s. But within that disease, we've seen younger being diagnosed.
Ah,
So that's why I'm saying it's a difficult question to answer.
yeah. Right. Because obviously, younger generation has been exposed to things that maybe some of us older generation were not exposed when we were young,
Right.
and or I don't know if we can say vice versa. I think there would be. Do you think that there would be more elements, more things that are more affecting health than, say, 30, 40 years ago? That might be
Yeah.
that might be attributed to cancer.
Yeah. I think some things have gone up, like some of the things
Mm-hmm.
described. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
down, like less
Mm-hmm.
use, less postmenopausal hormone use,
Mm-hmm.
some regulations, like
Mm-hmm.
not to smoke in public places,
Right.
the big sugary drinks, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then there are other things that I think have gotten worse. So
Mm-hmm.
kids that are vaping, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
stress levels. Also the fact that we're living longer,
Yeah.
that sounds like a good thing. It is a good thing.
Yeah.
But as we age, actually the most common risk factor for cancer is actually
Mm-hmm.
age. And the reason
Wow.
why is because those host mechanisms, those natural mechanisms that take care
Mm-hmm.
of things that go awry in our body,
Mm-hmm.
get
Mm-hmm.
less efficient over time.
Right.
And so a lot of people say, well, Dr. Mao, I can't do anything about that. And I go, well, age is just a number. It's not the
Right.
logic age, it's functional age.
Right.
How
Right.
can we make sure, so part of prevention is making sure that you're staying functional.
Mm-hmm. 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 So how do you guide your patients? I don't know if you call them patients. If people come to you as preventative measure, you don't call them patients. They're not sick yet. People come to you because we don't want to get sick, right?
That's a great point. I haven't thought of that. I call them patients out of habit, but
Yeah.
they're not sick. And it makes a statement about our um, healthcare system that it focuses on the sick. And I've
Mm-hmm.
complained a long time that we need to focus on the well.
Right.
There are patients that come in and do wellness exams, right?
Right.
I think it's still okay to call them patients. I guess maybe I'll just ask someone, should I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, Yeah, so what do I do? That's a great segue, I guess, into
Mm-hmm.
part of the cancer prevention movement. We offer these things called an Outsmart Cancer consultation.
Mm-hmm.
And I developed this as an offshoot of what I was doing when I was a faculty at City of Hope.
Mm-hmm.
The difference there was very much focused on cancer genetic testing, as
Mm-hmm.
I did, and
Mm-hmm.
still do, and also pre-malignant disease. These things,
Mm-hmm.
the beginnings of what would be cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and you remove them, and you're cured from that. But what can you do to prevent it from happening again?
Right, right.
Cancer survivors and wanting to prevent after,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a great opportunity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what I want to do, because I had this epidemiology background, I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
various risk factors,
Mm-hmm.
is to work with people and help them identify what those risk factors are so they can intervene. So, there's three parts to this consultation. The first part is like when you see any doctor, there's an intake form.
Mm-hmm.
Mine just goes into a lot of detail about exposures
Mm-hmm.
and family history.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because if there is a genetic, or I should say, a hereditary component,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
risk is so much higher than anything else that I want to identify that to make sure I'm giving the right recommendations for them. And then we can move on to all the other risk
I see.
factors. So I go over this long intake and pretty much determine, does this person need genetic testing or not,
Mm-hmm.
and cons, and then they can make an
Mm-hmm.
informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
We do that testing or not. The
Mm-hmm.
second time I see them, there's another intake about what screening they're currently doing,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we should have the test back at that point. And so
Mm-hmm.
we go over the tests, we go over epidemiologic risk calculations,
Right. Uh-huh.
um, and and basically at the end of that visit, I say, okay, these are the most common cancers.
Mm-hmm.
I go through systematically, and then if I see
Mm-hmm.
something more, I'll
Mm-hmm.
go. So the most common ones, those five are skin, breast, prostate, and lung. And
Mm.
if we were to eliminate those five cancers from the globe, we would have all the
Mm.
cancer. So that's why I do those systematically. And I
Right.
tell the patient, I let them know something about those cancers, and then this is the average person's risk. This is your
Mm.
risk. This is
Mm-hmm.
screening you told me you're doing, and this is screening you should be doing. And so they can
Right.
see right there if
Mm-hmm.
they're getting all the advice they should be from their primary care physician versus
Right.
a specialist like me. And sometimes it's reassuring. Sometimes it's fine as is,
Mm.
but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm telling them something they didn't know already. And
Right.
it's really easy to see the value of the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The third part is another intake that's more lifestyle oriented and choice.
Mm.
Some of the things we
Right.
talk about here. We
Mm-hmm.
can talk about diet and exercise, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then we go back over common cancers, average risk, your risk, what you say your behaviors are, what I think you could change,
Mm.
risk. And because I'm medically trained, that covers not just lifestyle, but
Mm.
also medicines or surgeries for people at higher risk. And that's not
Right.
for everybody, but we
Mm-hmm.
go over the pros and cons either way, and they can make an
Mm-hmm.
informed decision. I can't tell you, because I've been doing this so long, how often I can tell two different people the same risk and they'll make different choices. So then the rest of that visit's all about teasing through
Oh.
what are
Mm-hmm.
their values, what their
Mm.
risk tolerance, what do you want to do now versus later,
Mm-hmm.
and really empowering that patient
Mm-hmm.
or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
to make choices that are informed and make them feel in charge.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to talk to someone who doesn't have high risk, I'm going to ask you in two levels. So who may not have higher risk, say average risk. What are your tips in terms of what they can do in their home environment, like home or even even work environment? Because a lot of a lot of people are now working from home, like myself. Um, any tips that you would give in terms of watch out for this? You shouldn't do this. I mean, like, is there any like baseline tips that you can give to
Yeah, yeah,
people?
absolutely. So I'm going to say something's a little bit scary now, but it's the truth. Average
Mm-hmm.
risk is 1 out of 2 men and 1 out of 3 women get cancer in their lifetime. So
Mm,
average to me is unacceptable, and why I'm so passionate about getting people informed about the risk and what they can do about it. And so I think the first thing I would say is not to assume your risk is average, and really
mm,
assume that your risk is high, you know,
mm,
really high. Maybe it's more.
mm-hmm,
So I would say get an Outsmart cancer consultation, find out what your risk is. And then
mm-hmm.
after that, if it is average, to answer your question, it would be
Mm-hmm,
things that we talked about, making sure there's a
mm-hmm,
detector, that you have the MERV 11 in your
mm-hmm,
HVAC, you have a clean source of water.
mm-hmm,
I think of environment as the entire home.
mm-hmm.
So also,
Yeah,
what is your kitchen stuff?
yeah.
Do you have fruits and vegetables, or do you have a lot of packaged processed foods?
Mm-hmm,
Because we eat
mm-hmm.
what's there,
Right.
so what should we be throwing away and create
Mm-hmm,
space for something else?
mm-hmm,
Maybe what's in your backyard? Is there something you're
mm-hmm,
growing that's
mm-hmm,
healthy and not exposed to pesticides? So I do spend a lot of time talking about the diet, um,
mm-hmm,
because we kind of are what we eat.
mm-hmm.
Other things than in the home, like maybe rooms. So do you have a room that's calm and quiet for
Mm-hmm,
meditation and thinking,
mm-hmm,
reflection? Uh,
mm-hmm.
I mentioned stress earlier. Maybe we don't spend enough time um, really understanding how much disease stress causes.
Right.
So I think if you have a space for that, then
Mm-hmm.
you're more likely going to make that a daily habit. Similarly with
Yeah.
exercise. So if you have
Mm-hmm.
space for exercise, then more likely you'll use it, or at least
Mm-hmm.
the time you pass by, you'll feel really
Right.
happy if you're not.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
those are sort of some of the things that I would
Mm.
say in a home.
Wow, that's helpful. And so what if you come across, well, we're gonna call it patients or people who come to you who turns out that have higher risk.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you probably got some cases that you've dealt with, but what do you tell them? That, I mean, you know, like you can't just pick up and move to some other place, normally if you have a home already. What do you tell them when you find out that somebody is actually high risk? And is there anything that they can do in addition,
Mhm.
or with the existing environment, that they can minimize their risk?
Yeah. So Um, high risk would depend on what's causing that high risk.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna get some water.
Please do.
So see, always have it next to you. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So it depends on what's causing the risk.
Mm-hmm.
So if their high risk really is pollution or something
Mm,
in the environment, then they really need to think about how they're going to deal with that. And it could be things like having a good filter for
mm-hmm.
pollution that would help. If it's a stressful thing, like what can they do with it? It's not necessarily changing the home, but how can
Mm-hmm.
they arrange it to be a little less stressful? And things like a radon detector or changing out a fireplace, those are pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
things like the EMFs, I mean, those are more behavioral than
Mm,
are a home, unless you have a TV.
mm-hmm.
Just move it. And so
Yeah.
it's really not that difficult. But
Mm,
there are people that are at higher risk for different, very different reasons. Um,
mm-hmm.
and so then I just sort of deal with it depending on
I see.
risk for what and what's
Mm-hmm.
causing it. And so one thing that we definitely do is make sure that they're getting higher risk screening for those particular
I see.
risk
I see.
forms. And then we work on things like diet and exercise because, as I mentioned, all cancers have some kind of genetic nature, but it's usually mutations that happen after we're born. So you can reverse those through your
Right.
diseases.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. You can actually reverse that? That's pretty amazing.
If you come in before you actually get sick, yeah.
I see.
After you're sick, it depends. If you're healthy enough, maybe you can, especially
Right.
pregnancies.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And that's where, screening is really important because most cancers can't feel anything, not unless it's really late. So screening, the purpose of it is to find something before it's a problem. And so if you find it, it's actually, sometimes people are really shocked and they'll say, oh my God, this is terrible. And like, if they tell me it's a pre-malignancy or even stage 1, oh, how wonderful. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But it really is. It's a wake-up call. It's not like already brewing in you.
Exactly.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Found it early.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just really grateful and appreciate what you're doing, Melanie, because last year I went to a Green Build conference in San Francisco where people who are in the industry of building, and they were, it was all about how, building science and building sustainably. But one of the keynote speaker was Jane Fonda. And as you may know, she had a cancer. She survived cancer.
Yes.
And she was, in her speech and keynote, she said that she's been contacted by a lot of cancer research organizations, but most of the organizations were really focused on the cure of cancer. But she said that you guys, this was an audience of, I don't know, 510,000 people in the audience. And she was saying to the audience, you guys are working on the prevention. And so, and she said that most of those cancer research organizations are not talking about prevention, except, they're only talking about the treatment and cure, but they're not talking about prevention. So I really admire what you're doing with your work. So I really appreciate that. Tell us how we can find you and we can learn about what the wonderful work that you're doing.
Sure. So the Cancer Prevention Movement, the website is canpreventmovement.org. We say we can prevent, and if you look at cancer prevention, embedded in the word is can prevent. So canpreventmovement.org. And if you are interested in learning more about the Alzheimer's cancer consultation, there is some information on the website. So you can email health@canpreventmovement.com. We haven't changed our emails yet. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me see. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Okay. And we are going to release this episode on early June. And tell me about the is it June 4th you mentioned that that's a significant day in the cancer world. Tell me about that.
So June 4th, the first Sunday of every June, is called the National Cancer Survivors Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you were saying that too many organizations, and I agree with you, have for too long focused too much on treatment. That's an important part, okay?
Exactly. Yes,
we need to do
absolutely.
that, but not to the point of ignoring prevention.
Yeah.
Well, what I think is a great opportunity is cancer survivors like Jane Fonda yelling out and saying, hey, how about prevention? And so we wanted to release this at a time that a lot of cancer survivors are celebrating the fact that they have survived.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many patients have told me that cancer's been a wake-up call. And
Mm.
my hope is that people won't wait
Right.
until they get diagnosed. You know,
Right.
the statistics I was saying, most of us have something brewing in us already. It's not to
Mm.
discover, it's to
Mhm.
discover early or
Mhm.
prevent it altogether. You know,
Right.
we
Right.
can
Right.
reverse it or prevent it altogether. That's the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for all the work that you're doing for the world. I think it's absolutely amazing that you are able to do this to the world and, give us the gift of prevention. So thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, this was Home Green Homes podcast, Izumi Tanaka. Until the next episode. Thank